Hello, and welcome to my tutorial series on how to make a mobile game in Unity. In this tutorial series, you're going to learn how to make a very simple one-touch mechanic mobile game, like this one, where all you have to do is get the ball into the hoops. And you're going to learn how to publish this game onto Android, how to add ads to it, and then put it into the Google Play Store. Let's get started. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our Unity Hub, and we're going to hit new for new project. And then it's going to be a 2D project. And we're going to name our project, or I'm going to name my project Bouncy Hoop. And I'm going to put it in my Unity projects folder right here. I select that folder. And we're going to hit create. And now we'll give Unity a second to load up. So now we're going to get ourselves a little organized in the Unity editor. I'm going to change the name of the sample scene to Bouncy Hoops. I'm going to reload it. And then we're going to go into the assets folder, and I'm going to create a couple new folders. I'm going to create one called sprites. And I'm going to create another folder called scripts. So now let's grab our artwork. We're going to put it right here in our sprites folder. All the sprites for this project are right here in this Google Drive folder, which I will provide the link to below. Simply highlight them all, right click and click download. I've already downloaded them. They're right here in my downloads inside this zip folder. I'm simply going to right click and go down to extract all. Just going to extract it right into that folder right here. And then I'm going to take all of these right here. And I'm going to just highlight all of them and then put them right into this sprites folder right here. You can just drag them all and they'll all download. Maybe these didn't together. There we go. Oh, I got two balls there now. Just took a second. So we'll just delete that second ball right there. And here are all our assets right here. So the next thing we want to do is create our actual player ball in here. So we're going to right click. We're going to go down to create empty. And we're simply going to call this ball. This created an empty game object right here. We're going to add a component. The first one is going to be a sprite renderer, which will allow us to put our picture right here, our picture of our ball, our sprite of our ball into the game. And you can use any ball picture you want. If you don't want a basketball, you can use a soccer ball, whatever. We're going to go right here. We're going to put this right here in the middle of our game for now. And there's our ball. And we're actually going to add a couple other components here. We're going to add a rigid body 2D, and we're going to add a circle collider 2D to it because it's going to have a rigid body. It's going to be able to interact with things, or it's going to have physics added to it, of course, because the balls is going to float and bounce. And the circle collider 2D allows it to interact with other objects like the hoops. So now that we have our ball in our game, we need to move our ball. So we're going to go back to the assets folder. We're going to open up our scripts folder. And we're going to right click, we're going to go up to create, go to C# script, and our C# script is simply going to be called, I don't know, we'll just call it Bouncy Move. Call it anything you want. And then we're going to go here and we're going to open up our C# script and get started putting movement to our object. So once our C# script is opened, we want to start off by declaring some variables. So the very first one we're going to declare is a private rigid body 2D with a capital D. And we're going to name our rigid body M rigid body and a semicolon at the end. So actually I'll just create more room because we're going to have more variables. So private means that it won't be public here in the Unity editor. This tells us what the object is. It's a rigid body and this is the name we have given it. So the next thing we need is that we're going to create 2 brackets, and we're going to write in this serialize field, and then at the end of it we're going to put private string, and we're going to call that string an input, and a semicolon at the end. So I just spoke earlier how private means it won't appear in our editor down here, but when I put serialized field in front of it, actually I'll show you here, and we'll just hit save. And so when I put serialized field in it, the private thing actually becomes public, meaning that it will appear here. And the reason why you do that is really a processing reason. Actually, we have to attach our script to our component, simply grab it and drag it in here. So you see we have an input here and it has a blank line for us to place our input, what our button's going to be right here. And it didn't put the private rigid body inside. So you can also write public here. In fact, I'll just show you that real quick. I can also type public there and hit save. And it will show a space for a rigid body to go into. So there's 2 ways to show something in the Unity editor. And once again, the reason why you do serialized field and put private really has to do with if you have bigger projects and processing becomes a very big deal, how fast it's going to run. It helps the Unity editor better if it's a serialized field and private rather than it trying to deal with a public one. I'm going to put that back to private. We have our serialized field, our public string m input, which is what the button we're going to push is, which is going to be the mouse button. And then we're going to have, we're just going to highlight that, copy it, and put it here, hit Control V. So I don't want a private string this time, I want a private float. And as I've said in other videos, or if you've seen before in coding, private float is a number, which is a decimal, and integer is a whole number. So this one is going to be called m vertical bump amount and a space, and that's going to equal, let's try 8.5. And then we're going to create a couple more floats here. So I'm going to highlight this again, Control C to copy, Control V to print. Our next one, actually, I want this to be a capital V. And right here, the next float is actually going to be a horizontal bump amount because our object is going to move horizontally and vertically. It's going to bounce up and down and it's going to move forward at the same time. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to Control V again. We're going to create another float. This one is going to be called max speed. M underscore max speed. And that's going to equal, let's say, 3F. At the end, and you put an F at the end for the float. And let's see, one more float. We're gonna have Control V. It's going to be our gravity scale. So we're gonna name this one M underscore gravity scale, because we want to be able to adjust our gravity in this game a little bit, because we don't necessarily want a regular physical gravity. Gotta create a space here. Want to be able to adjust a little bit so our gravity can adjust to what feels good for our player as he controls the ball. We'll hit save up here. So now we're gonna initiate all the things we want to happen at the start. When we push play, the very first thing we want to do is we want to grab our rigid body. We want to make sure we designate which rigid body it is. So it's going to equal get component less than sign, and inside it we're going to say rigid body 2D, and then close it out with a greater than sign, or whichever it is. And then we're going to put a parentheses, and at the end, we're going to put a semicolon. So when we push start, we're going to say, hey, the rigid body we want is the component in our player that is the rigid body 2D right here, which is let it process for a second, which is this rigid body right here. When we type it that way, we're saying this rigid body, we're going to make sure that we're calling it by this name for the rest of our code. And after that, what we want to do is m_rigid body dot gravity scale, and we're going to set that to 0. And the reason why we're doing that is that when the game starts, or at least right now from the game starts, there'll probably be a different countdown system as this project moves on. We don't want the ball to automatically fall, so we're setting the gravity to 0. So that way when we push play, the ball sits there. I'll just go over here to the project of this that it's being derived off of. We go here to our game and I hit play. Our ball doesn't move right now until I click the button for the first time because the gravity scale is at 0. And the minute I hit it, then it changes to the gravity scale as we want it in the game. Now my wings are going to fall off because I missed the hoop. But you get the idea of why we're doing that at the start. So go back into our project and back here into our script. So now that we've handled everything we want at the start, what we now have to do is figure out what we're going to do every single frame, or what's going to be called once per frame here on our update function. So the first thing we want there is we want to be able to input movement when we hit a button. So we're going to input dot get button down, and then in parentheses we're going to put m input, which was our private string up there, and then we're going to create 2 other curly brackets right here to say what happens when we push our button. So if we input get button down, if we hit the button, we are going to input right here. We're gonna put in whatever button we want out of our input manager later on, which in my case will be the fire button, but you might want to choose a different one. So when we hit the button that's going to move our object, we simply want to enact a function which we're going to call, nope, we don't want that. I don't know why it's doing that. Bump. There we go. And then curly brackets. This right here is going to be designated down here. So we're going to create a function. And a function that we're going to call bump. So right here, this is a function. Basically, we're calling a bunch of lines of code. Oftentimes, functions are used just to make things cleaner in the update and start functions. So over here in our bump function, we're going to put m_gravity. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we're going to put m_rigid body dot gravity scale. And then we're going to set that equal to m_gravity scale, put a semicolon at the end. So when we click our button here and we enact this bump function, the very first thing that's going to happen is that the gravity is going to change from 0 to whatever. This still doesn't say the right thing. Sorry about that. It's m_gravity scale. So back to what I was saying. At the start, the gravity is going to be 0, but when we hit our button for the first time, the gravity is going to change to the gravity scale, which is 3. So it's going to change from a natural gravity to the gravity we want it to be. So the very next thing is that m_rigid body dot velocity is going to equal vector2 dot 0, and then underneath that we're going to say m underscore rigid body dot add force, and then we're going to say vector3 dot up, and I'll explain what this all is in a second, just let me type it out, times m underscore vertical bump amount, and then this is going to be added to a vector3 dot right times m underscore horizontal bump amount. Hopefully you can't hear my chair squeaking in the background. I'll fix that later. And then comma space force mode 2D dot impulse. And at the end of this, a semicolon. So what's going to happen here is we're going to hit our button. Our bump function is going to be executed, and then the gravity is going to change. And between these two lines of code, the velocity of this is going to be 0, but it's going to add a force to it that is going to be partially a vector3 that's going to go upwards by our bump amount, plus a vector3 dot right, which is going to be going to our right horizontally, times this horizontal bump amount, which is basically going to give us our sort of go up and to the right movement that our ball has as we click the button. And then force mode 2D dot impulse is basically, it's going to add a force based on its mass at the end of it. So what we've done here in a nutshell is that for every time we hit the button, the ball will bounce, it will bounce up and down. It will go up and it'll go forward and to the right over and over again. Actually right here, let's fix this. That should not be m dash input. It just should be plain input there. Let's hit save. So let's go look at this for a second over here, and let's click on ball, and we need an input. So the button I'm going to use is fire1, which if we go over here to edit and we go to project settings and we go to input manager, let everything load a second. The script load. So anyway, right here under axes, there'll be a bunch of buttons, and fire 1 is generally the left mouse button. You can also put 0 for the left mouse button. There we go, that's finally done. So right here it says fire 1 is our joystick button 0, but it's also my mouse button here. So, and also my mouse button X is also can be listed as 0, so you can also use that also. So I'm going to close this right here, and I'm going to hit play. And so now, just as expected, nothing will happen till the first time I hit my left mouse button, or I in this case it's a mobile game, I'll be tapping it with my finger. So I'll hit the button, it'll move, but if you look, the movement's kind of slow. It's not as smooth as we would want it to be compared to the other game. So we're going to add some code that will fix that. So we want to do some adjustments to our velocity. We want to say vector2, and we're going to say forward adjustment, and that's going to equal a vector2 dot 0, and then after that we're going to say if m underscore max speed, no, I'm sorry, m underscore rigid body dot velocity dot x. I'm going to say if that is greater than our m underscore max speed, then if that happens, I'm going to put our squiggly brackets here. If that happens, then we want to change the forward, did I spell forward right? W-A-R-D adjustment, and I'm going to say plus equals to -1. And on the next line, we're going to say m underscore rigid body dot velocity is going to plus equals forward adjustment. So here we defined our this forward adjustment vector to vector2.0 after we hit our button. But if our velocity is greater than our max speed, then we want to subtract our forward adjustment and then add to our forward adjustment. So it keeps a little bit of a more smoother movement. Oh, actually, I didn't spell any of this right. Should be an R here. And actually, this should be, forward adjustment dot X, because it's in the X direction, and this should have an R right here. So that makes a little more sense. Let's hit save. So now if we go back into Unity, we can go click on our ball here. Let's hit play and see what it looks like. And it looks a little smoother and a little quicker, not quite as well as one would thought. Let's bump our vertical movement up a little bit and give it a little more bounciness. All right, that looks a little better. We'll have to maybe just play with that a little bit. So that's it for today. As always, thank you for watching. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and support me on Patreon. And a special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. All links are in the description below. See you next time.